The old city of Dubrovnik: conflict and its impact on tourism in a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In 1991, the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia collapsed, leading to the split of the 6 Balkan countries that formed it. The death of its patriarchal leader Tito in 1980, who held Yugoslavia together symbolically and practically, and the eventual succession of Slobodan Milosevic in 1989 significantly increased ethnic tensions between the separate countries. These political and ethnic concerns were exacerbated further following its breakup. Croatia was one of the first countries to declare its independence from the Serbian-led Yugoslavia, which in turn led to the Croatian War of Independence, the first of many internally fought Yugoslav wars of the 1990s. The war, however, came at a price for the cultural heritage in Croatia. The old city of Dubrovnik, a UNESCO-listed World Heritage Site filled with medieval architecture and a popular tourist destination, was the scene of mass shelling and destruction by the Serbian army, otherwise known as the JNA or the Yugoslav People's Army, in the final months of 1991. This essay will assess the damage to Dubrovnik and its cultural heritage, assessing the devastating impact of the conflict on Dubrovnik's tourist industry, which was and continues to be vital to the city's economy. Similarly, the importance and influence of UNESCO will also be explored, examining their role in the restoration of the city and its contribution to rebuilding the tourist industry in the immediate aftermath of the war, and whether it is fair to view the organisation as the embodiment of cultural imperialism or cultural protectionism. Tomlinson notes that UNESCO constantly asserts the legitimate superordinacy of nation-states over other agencies within the global conversation, and is thus perceived as imperialist. However, UNESCO's restoration of the city had little to do with political and ethnic issues, and instead solely to preserve and restore Dubrovnik's cultural heritage. Tourism has therefore greatly improved in Dubrovnik since the war, as UNESCO's involvement and the war itself has led to the growth of additional tourist attractions in war and film tourism. The old city of Dubrovnik is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, located on the southern tip of Croatia, on the coast of the Adriatic Sea. Tourism makes a significant contribution to the local economy, as the city is an immensely popular historical site and tourist attraction. Amongst the various medieval architecture in the city, Dubrovnik is noted for its ancient city walls, which are regarded as among the most complete and finest systems of city fortification in Europe. Dubrovnik was listed a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1979. However, following the outbreak of war between the Croats and Serbs for Croatia's independence in late 1991, the city was the target of mass shelling and the centre of a war zone. Ultimately, the city was in a state of exceptional emergency caused by the armed conflict, and as a result was placed on UNESCO's list of World Heritage in Danger the same year. The war in Croatia inevitably had an immensely detrimental impact on the local tourist industry. Between 1985 and 1990, the average number of tourists arriving was well over 10,000 annual visitors, but by 1995 this had fallen to less than 2,500. Nadari acknowledges the significance of tourism in Dubrovnik, noting that it made up the city's livelihood, which was wiped out as a result of the war. The Yugoslav officials themselves further acknowledged the importance of the city as a tourist attraction and its financial benefits to the country, as the Serbian capital Belgrade declared the area a demilitarized zone 20 years prior to the war, for fear that the presence of JNA armed forces would prevent tourists from visiting. Of course, when war broke out between the Serbs and the Croats, this mattered little to the Serbian government, who in contrast aimed to demolish the tourist industry and heritage in Dubrovnik to prevent Croatia's further fighting for and gaining independence. It has been stated that the siege of Dubrovnik was not intended as a means to annihilate the city, but was instead to destroy the symbolic places of exchange and of the possible meetings between diverse populations in the area. This is true, as destroying Croatian heritage was to destroy morale. Thus, the conflict was ethnically driven, and destroying what was deemed important and irreplaceable to Croatian culture and their sense of identity would, it was hoped, convince the country to abandon their desire for independence and rejoin Yugoslavia. Nevertheless, although failing in their purpose to destroy the country's morale, the Serb army did succeed in damaging the city's primary source of financial income through tourism. Dubrovnik had been an important destination for foreign visitors for over 150 years, and before Croatian independence had an important European-based mass tourist industry. The country as a whole was a vastly important tourist destination to the Croatian economy, with 10 million tourists visiting the country annually, bringing $3.5 to $4 billion a year in revenues. Dubrovnik was no exception. As war in the region broke out, it was noted that the locals were in fact more concerned about how the ethnic violence would affect tourism in the area than other effects the war would have. It is clear, therefore, that heritage and tourism was extremely important to Dubrovnik. Financially dependent on tourism, Dubrovnik did indeed suffer for two reasons. The first was that as the war continued in the region, inevitably tourists and visitors simply refused to go to the city for their own safety, and secondly, the significant damage to the city's heritage and ancient architecture further deterred tourists from visiting. Zaknic questions the purpose for Serbian shelling in Dubrovnik, as the army knew that the Croatians had no army to fight back. He states that the potential explanations were either to destroy the local economy, to punish the prosperous breakaway republic and deny them any possibility of an easy independence, or the destruction of a heritage, that is, cultural genocide. Zaknic presents them as separate answers to the destruction of Croatian heritage, whereas one in fact leads to the other. Destroying 70% of the priceless listed architecture would have significantly depleted the city's place as a culturally significant heritage site, and would have instantly reduced the number of visitors in the city post-conflict. However, funding and resources from UNESCO prevented this. Dubrovnik's place as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and great importance as an international tourist destination was advantageous to the city under attack. As Oliver notes, the Serbs' offensive of the city was to destroy Croatian morale in the war, yet this failed. However, there was an international outcry when photos of smoke billowing from the city made it into the international media in 1991. The siege of Dubrovnik is a unique example of UNESCO's direct involvement in conflict. Targeting a historically significant listed cultural heritage site was considerably problematic for UNESCO, leading to the city being put on the danger list in 1991 in order to encourage special measures to be taken for its preservation. However, UNESCO's involvement in other nations' cultural heritage has been viewed with a level of disdain in certain countries as embodying the concept of cultural imperialism by involving itself and its Western ideals of culture and heritage onto those who do not necessarily adhere to it. Tomlinson acknowledges that involving itself in international cultural heritage also takes control of what happens to heritage that represents a cultural identity that the organization has no right to interfere with. However, this is not the case. UNESCO's involvement in Dubrovnik was not to engage in the political and ethnic tensions occurring at the time, but solely for the protection of the heritage that lied in the city. UNESCO's role in international issues is not to impose ideologies or ideals onto other nations, but to protect the unique and valuable heritage that is potentially at risk as a result of conflict. As UNESCO states themselves, their aim is to protect heritage around the world with the help of the individual country's government, to show the importance of solidarity and nations' shared responsibility in conserving outstanding cultural sites. Therefore, it is clear that rather than being culturally imperialist, UNESCO is an organization that is culturally protectionist. UNESCO's involvement was paramount to rebuild and restore Dubrovnik's historic architecture, beginning the restoration works in February 1993 to protect and conserve the city's heritage for its status as being culturally significant. International involvement working alongside Croatian teams of architects, sculptors, restorers, and other experts meant that they managed to complete the bulk work within 7 years. Completing the majority of the work in this period allowed Dubrovnik to reclaim its position as a popular tourist coastal city and re-attract visitors. Tanner acknowledges that Dubrovnik was saved due to its reputation as a historic site that was a result of being listed by UNESCO, and this is clear when assessing the events unfolding in the country at the same time. In August 1991, the Serbian army also conducted a massive attack on the Croatian town of Vukovar during the War of Independence. However, despite Vukovar being bombed by air and land almost day and night, it had no priceless architectural treasures to engage the world's fickle attention like Dubrovnik. UNESCO's involvement and the cultural significance of the city to the international community drastically improved its chances of preservation and gaining greater funding, resources and restoration as a result. In 1998, following the positive advice on the restoration work undertaken and the recommendations of the Bureau, the committee decided to delete the old city of Dubrovnik from the list of World Heritage in danger due to the restoration efforts of Croatia, UNESCO and other international architects. Furthermore, Dubrovnik being listed by UNESCO and its cultural and international significance helped in the prosecution of the Serb leaders involved in orchestrating the attack on Dubrovnik. The JNA leader, Pavle Strugar, was imprisoned as a result of the immense damage on the heritage in the city, where according to the tribunal in The Hague, mortar rounds were fired, destroying a number of structures of considerable architectural and historical merit, alongside murder and war crimes. It was specifically acknowledged that UNESCO was imperative in saving the historic architecture due to its international popularity and the funding and restoration that UNESCO provided. The conflict in Dubrovnik is demonstrative of UNESCO's success in preserving heritage and protecting it, and describes the organisation as culturally imperialist. Without the organisation's intervention in regards to providing funding and resources, restoration of the city's architecture would have been a much slower process, or may never have happened at all had the conflict taken a different turn. UNESCO was therefore imperative in saving both the irreplaceable heritage of Dubrovnik through their funding and assisting the Croatian government, and save the livelihoods of the majority of local Croatians who rely on tourism as a means of primary income. Tourism in Dubrovnik has surged since the end of the war, and this has been a result of UNESCO's prevalence in rebuilding the city in increasing visitor numbers, and similarly, UNESCO's protection and restoration of the city has greatly improved Dubrovnik's economy since 1998. This occurred as restoring the city's architectural heritage has allowed the local people to subsequently develop other tourist opportunities in war tourism and film tourism. Rebuilding the city as a result of conflict has become a form of heritage in itself, with a map on the North Gate detailing the sites of damage caused by aggression on Dubrovnik by the Yugoslav army, the Serbs and the Montenegrins in 1991 and 1992. Tourists invested in the Yugoslav Wars, and specifically the siege of Dubrovnik, are now given the opportunity to be part of walking tours that are in addition to the already existing tourist spots. Despite UNESCO and Croatia's efforts to fully repair the city, scars of the war remain, where tours conducted offer visitors the chance to view the damaged rooftops and pavements in the town. UNESCO's intervention in the reconstruction of the damaged buildings in Dubrovnik has increased the number of tourists visiting, and greatly improving the tourist industry. Rebuilding the city at such a fast pace and placing the war torn city on the dangers list and making it an imperative project proves that UNESCO's involvement in the eastern region greatly benefited the country during and post-conflict. Restoring Dubrovnik to its original condition has also increased the city's popularity due to other industries that have taken advantage of the restored heritage, particularly the film industry. Partially filmed in Dubrovnik, the popularity of the HBO series Game of Thrones has helped bolster tourist numbers in the city, with many guidebooks and other visitor communication including the series as part of the visitor experience, where almost every local guide offers a Game of Thrones walking tour. Similarly, film tourism has resulted in a 38% increase in tourist arrivals, a 29% increase in overnight stays, and a 37% increase in city walls admission tickets. Most of the tourists are from the United Kingdom, the USA, Germany, France, Spain, Croatia, Australia, and Sweden. Restoring Dubrovnik's architectural heritage and its recognition as a historically important area has considerably increased its popularity as a tourist destination post-war, with particular influxes of tourists from Western countries. This demonstrates how Croatia has distanced itself from its Yugoslav past by integrating itself with Europe, seen in its acceptance into the EU in 2013. This could not have happened had UNESCO not involved itself in preserving and restoring the heritage of the city when war broke out in 1991, and acknowledging it as an imperialist organisation is incorrect. Contrary, its its involvement has created an even greater advertisement for the city by attracting those not only interested in visiting its beaches or acknowledging its medieval architecture, but also those interested in its recent history as the centre of a significant event in the Yugoslav Wars. The siege in Dubrovnik and the international recognition of UNESCO's restoration has benefited local work opportunities for Croatians in Dubrovnik's tourist industry and the local economy. Although the conflict was detrimental in the immediate term to tourism, the conflict has not only restored the tourist industry, but also improved it immensely over the last 30 years for additional recognition as the scene of warfare and film locations. This popularity can be seen in assessing recent figures regarding visits to the city. A notoriously warm country on the coast, Croatia benefits primarily in summer months. In the peak months of July and August in 2014, 58% of tourists visited the country. However, this fell dramatically between November and March to only 3.7%. However, as tourism is continuing to increase in popularity, Dubrovnik is now just as popular as winter months, where we found that in 2017, despite the fact that most hotels were closed, 26,947 tourists arrived in Dubrovnik in November, which was an increase of 23%. Likewise, the tourism statistics also note that 88% of foreign visitors in 2012 were from the EU and accounted for €3.5 billion of tourism expenditure. Thus, to state UNESCO as culturally imperialist is inaccurate, as its purpose was, and still is, to prevent significant damage to heritage. Tony Barber noted on his visit to Dubrovnik in 1992 into which tourism had been impacted by the conflict, where, in high summer, tens of thousands of tourists should be filling the hotels, shops and restaurants. Instead, it is a virtual ghost town. The impact of the Serbian offensive on Dubrovnik's tourist industry was detrimental to the local economy, but was nevertheless saved by UNESCO's intervention in rebuilding and restoring the damaged buildings in the following 7 years. UNESCO's involvement in placing the city on the list of endangered heritage was imperative in rebuilding both the city itself and tourism in the region, which the local economy and population benefited from immensely. As a result of the city's status and its rich heritage that no war had destroyed before, a commission of national and international experts was established while the conflict was still ongoing. The immediate response from UNESCO to ensure the prevention of architectural destruction in the city enabled tourist industries and local businesses to regain the number of visitors they had prior to the war, with even greater numbers arriving due to the increase in interest of war and film tourism over the last 30 years. Thus, UNESCO cannot be seen as culturally imperialist but protectionist. Restoring the city to its prior state has been beneficial historically and financially for the local tourist industry. Tourism in Dubrovnik is presently the largest the city has seen, where 2017 saw a 17% increase in international visitors compared to 2016, and the economy has benefited greatly. Not only is the city now appealing as a result of being a listed World Heritage Site and its coasts, but also due to its prevalence in the media during the Yugoslav Wars and the increase in war tourism and film tourism post-conflict. Due to UNESCO's intervention in the conflict, Dubrovnik returned to its pre-war splendor, and as a result, tourism has flourished and continues to flourish today.